training topic for today is going to be a Reach Tips training on selecting strategies. This is a very, I don't want to say uncomfortable or struggling topic that a lot of people have issues with, but it is something that people tend to probably get marked as needs attention for the most when it comes to their Reach entries. A lot of times it's for that strategy alignment and that strategy that they're selecting. So at the end of today, I want to make sure you guys have a really good understanding, A, of our strategies. We'll kind of spend some time today going through those. Just recap, so it's not going to be too intense for you guys. It's just going to be a quick review of those strategies so we feel comfortable knowing exactly what they are. We're also going to then talk about kind of how intervention mapping plays a role in our selection strategy and how at the end of the day, it can kind of help us with that. When we come into Reach and we're entering our data, if we have that intervention mapping clear in our mind, we can a lot of times enter our data into Reach a lot easier and feel confident in that strategy that we're selecting. And then we're also going to go into some examples today as well. So with that in mind, we're going to round everything out with kind of tips, questions, anything else at the end that you guys may want to talk about or talk through. And we will leave some time at the end as well for examples that you guys may have and want to talk through. With that being said, I also want to kind of give the caveat at the beginning of today's training that a lot of times strategies can be, I don't want to say stretched, but sometimes there might be certain cases where a strategy can be one strategy here, maybe a different strategy over here. And there's a lot of times where we might get into that case today where you guys are like, well, there's two options that this could be, right? However, at the end of the day, it's really about narrowing down our focus of our Reach output that we are tracking. So at the end of the day today, I always want you guys to kind of come back to this question of what is my intention? What was the coalition's intention by doing this output? Because that a lot of times will help us really narrow into that correct strategy that we need to be selecting. So kind of, that might, if anything you get to take away from today, it's that question, asking myself, what is my intention here? And what are we really working on in terms of a strategy? So with that being said, let's go ahead and start with the review of our behavior change strategies. So hopefully you guys are very familiar with these, judging by who I can see is online today on this webinar. I think you guys are all pretty confident in saying you know these strategies, which is great. So we're not going to spend too much time today. We're just going to kind of go through the basics. First things first, hopefully you all know that comprehensive lasting change usually takes place at those two different levels, both individual and environmental. At the end of the day, you guys as coalition leaders know that it's always good to have a healthy dosing of both individual and environmental. When we look at the difference between the two, we know that individual is going to have more of a focus on a behavior change, tends to be more of those, fluffy strategies that we like to implement, but at the end of the day aren't going to typically have any hard lasting impact on our community. Whereas our environmental strategies have more of a focus on, a policy, a practice, a procedure, a way we operate. It's going to really be those, at the end of the day, large changes that we're trying to implement that are going to have an overall impact on the entire community, not just one group, not just, a collection of a couple people. It's where we're really trying to impact the overall change of our community, right? So when it comes to knowing the difference between the two, I always like to describe, like I said, our individual as our very fluffy, light. They're important. They add sustenance to the work we do. At the same time, though, it's always good to bring in those environmental strategies along with our individual to help kind of back that up, give some content, give it some, sustenance. It's our meat and potatoes. It really should be the area we live, breathe, and work in, because it's going to be ultimately the way we help, make our community a better place to live and work in, right? So we've talked about the individual, the environmental, the difference between the two. Now let's kind of get into a review of what those 7 strategies actually are. Again, we're not going to get too far into these today. I want to just kind of pull them up here so you guys have a good, quick refresher of what they are. We have our changing consequences. So, incentivizing behaviors that we want to see, providing disincentives for behaviors that we don't want to see, enhancing access and reducing barriers, or that can also be enhancing barriers and reducing access. So always remember there's kind of that twofold to that strategy. Changing physical design, so obviously where we're trying to affect or change the permanent layout, design, look of a specific area, shop, store, anything in our community that we're trying to really change that permanent design or layout and look of something. Modifying, changing policies, I think speaks for itself. Any and all of our policy work, whether that be a small p, a big P, a practice change, a procedure modification that we may make, anything there will fall with that strategy. Providing information, I like to say, is always the easiest, right? Because at a minimum, everything we are doing is typically providing information. It's always making sure that we're thinking through that a step further to make sure that there's no other strategy that we're actually utilizing at that point in time. But providing information, that's always going to be, giving information, whether that be through a media message, a presentation. Maybe it's just simply having a meeting to share some data or share some information. Enhancing skills is our next strategy. This is where a lot of our trainings come into play. So where we're actively trying to enhance the skills of those in attendance by either training them on a new skill, enhancing them on a skill they may already have, and just expanding on it. Really anything where we're trying to give them some new knowledge to be able to function and improve their own community. Providing support. This one can be a little bit of a trickier one sometimes because it's not always the easiest to look at how we can actually provide support in our community. We do it on a daily basis, providing support to other entities, whether it be another person who has similar funding as us, or someone who, maybe it's a school and you're providing them support a different way. At the end of the day, we really want to think of providing a support as almost providing an alternative to, whether it's a youth using drugs, what kind of support can we provide them that gives them the alternative option to not do those drugs, right? To not drink. So that's really what we need to think through when we're thinking of that strategy and providing support to those in the community. So now I thought it was really important today to also bring in the piece about intervention mapping. We do a full presentation a lot of times for our clients on this topic specifically, because it's a big part of kind of how you guys pull everything together and really wrap everything up in a pretty bow that we call an action plan and a logic model. So at the end of the day, I just thought this was very important to bring up because I always recommend to people when you're looking at the type of work you should be doing, as well as the type of entries that you should be putting into Reach, your action plan should always be something that's sitting right next to you, because at the end of the day, as you guys all know, your action plan is focused around the 7 strategies, and you a lot of times have to put those into your action plan by strategy. So it's always helpful to have that next to you, because it literally tells you right on there what strategy you should be selecting for your Reach entry. So if you're ever in doubt or kind of wondering what strategy to select, always refer to that first. Go with your gut, and then if you're like, I'm kind of hesitant on this, refer to your action plan, because it probably tells you right on there. And the reason being is because comprehensive intervention is really the complete package, right? It's a multi-component efforts that we're putting together, whether that be implementing programs, passing policies, updating new practices, whatever it all is, it's all intended to achieve an overall result. So at the end of the day, we look at comprehensive interventions, we look at all of this as a whole, we put it into our action plan, right? Because that's what we want to accomplish. That's what's going to get us to our goals of reducing, alcohol use, youth alcohol use, reducing youth drug use. And that's why we kind of want to make sure that we're really thinking about this as a big picture as well. So now when it comes to intervention mapping specifically, A lot of times this comes in once we already have our logic model somewhat thought out, put into place, right? We have the idea of our problem, our risk factors, our local conditions. We have to have our data along with those. Usually by the time we have all that mapped out, we have a good idea of what kind of interventions we need to then be working on off of that, right? So mapping interventions really becomes this part of our action plan. It becomes, let's look at those 7 strategies and think and plan out how we're going to use those strategies to address that local condition. That's what our action plans are, guys. It might be sometimes more of a high level approach. We might not go too far down to this local condition level. But on your own, maybe this is something your coalition needs to be doing, is taking it to this more of the local condition level and really looking at what are we trying to change, right? Because hopefully by changing and working on some of these local condition level stuff, we're going to get that trickle down effect of ultimately impacting our underage drinking numbers, reducing that use, right? So at the end of the day, I think it's really important to know how intervention mapping works and why we do it, because I think at the end of the day, it's going to help us see how our strategies really play into that. So here I have a quick little example. I pulled out the local condition that gas stations are selling alcohol to minors without checking IDs. Pretty kind of substandard one. I think a lot of coalitions work on underage drinking. So I wanted to kind of pull this one out as a quick view for us to look at. So individual strategies, we have providing information. So I'm going to go ahead and think through what kind of providing information approach can we take to this local condition of gas stations selling alcohol to minors. My coalition ended up coming up with, hey, let's put together some materials to give to our clerks on the importance of checking IDs and the consequences that they could come across if they do sell to a minor. Providing this information piece is a quick, easy way for us to use that strategy. And it's not always as effective as maybe some of the other strategies we're going to look at going through these. But hey, it's a way for us to use that strategy and get that information out there. Our next strategy is building skills. So how can we address this one? We're going to go ahead and do a merchant alcohol training, right? Everyone has heard of those, whether it's TIPS, TAMS, RVS. We tend to do these quite a bit. And if we're not, maybe it's getting those merchants to agree to participating in these trainings and getting them to that level. Providing social support. So how are we going to provide support around this, right? What can we do in terms of that strategy? We came up with Coalition provides stipends for materials and trainings. We ended up doing trainings as well. So if a certain merchant or clerk specifically wanted to attend a training, but maybe that business couldn't pay for them to go to that TIPS training or go to that TAMS training, we would then provide a type of stipend to maybe cover half the cost to make it more affordable to send that person there. That helps provide that support to the business that they need to get their people trained, and hopefully at the end of the day reduces the amount of clerks that they have selling to minors, right? So those are our individual level strategies. A lot of those seem very doable, easy for us to achieve. Now let's take a look at this little bit of a harder side with our environmental strategies. Reduce barriers, and enhance access is our first one we're going to look at. In this one, we decided that, hey, if we're going to already be hosting, we're going to decide to host these trainings, why not host them at the business? Why not bring it to them so they don't have to worry about their clerks trying to, get transportation to come to our trainings or get time off of work to come to it even. Maybe we do it right there in their work hours. Making it a lot easier, enhancing the access to the training helps them get what they need. Changing consequences or incentives. We decided to start an incentive program for businesses that pass their checks. Hey, in order to make sure that all of these other things that we're doing, whether it's training, providing materials, enhancing access to training, we want to make sure that, hey, if we're going to be doing all this, we want to see that the numbers get better. And to even help our odds even more, we're going to provide an incentive program to the businesses that pass those checks, right? Our next strategy we came up with was physical design, and we decided that we're going to implement scanning devices in the stores. At the end of the day, to make it, you could also kind of argue that this is an enhancing access feature, but at the end of the day, it's really altering the layout, the look, the feel. It's a permanent scanning device that they now have in the stores available to their clerks. We decided that this was a very big part that we wanted our stores to be implementing this design change, because at the end of the day, it makes it easier for their clerks to have that and scan, and it kind of holds them more accountable at the end of the day. Lastly, our policy and rules, which I'm sure, as you guys can probably guess by me kind of talking about all these other strategies, we decided to kind of come up with a local ordinance requiring all licensed retailers to be trained and send their clerks and employees to training. A lot of times, it might be a lot easier for other organizations like you guys to start with this big P. Start with this and work backwards from it. That is actually kind of how we thought about doing it. We really started at that, hey, we know we need an ordinance here. We don't have one. There needs to be some kind of law change that requires them to do this, because then everything else will trickle down after that, right? We'll get them to implement the scanning devices. We will get them to provide, these trainings on site so their clerks and their staff can come to them easier. A lot of those things will come a lot easier for us if we get this ordinance passed first. So it's really important to, at the end of the day, to think through those, because we might think, hey, all we need is an ordinance change and that's it. Yes, in some cases that might be correct, but at the end of the day, there might be all of these other changes, little things that we can make and we can do that even just enhance our opportunity and enhance the ability for us to impact this local condition even more by doing all these other things, aside from just maybe one policy change. So I hope that kind of makes sense in terms of a mapping interventions approach to everyone, because I'm sure you guys didn't even know that this is what you've been doing with your work the whole time, and how easy it was to link it back to a strategy for reach tracking purposes. So if you do ever have any questions on kind of the whole mapping interventions piece, how all that plays together, like I said, we do a whole training just on this aspect. And I do believe we have one recorded on our YouTube. So if there's ever anyone who's interested, it should be up on our resources page, and you can go ahead and check that out there as well. If not, feel free to contact me and I can make sure that you are able to get it without any trouble. So with that being said, we're going to kind of spend the last part of our training here today on some examples. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to spend some time kind of quizzing you guys on some of these too, because I always like to see what you guys are thinking straight out of the gate, aside from me just reading things off to you and telling you how it should be. I like to kind of get your guys' opinion. So we're going to start today with this example. It's going to be a community action. And that's going to be that my staff met with the manager of ABC Liquor to discuss the store possibly implementing a new practice requiring their employees to scan all IDs with a scanner. Hey, look, here's another policy opportunity that goes along with the last example we were kind of talking about. So I went ahead and filled in the logic model for us, and I come down to my strategy here. So this is where I kind of want you guys pull up your chat and just kind of let me know what you think we should put here as the strategy. So Caitlin, I'm going to encourage you to, yes, like we kind of said earlier, everything's providing information, right? So at the end of the day, think past the providing information piece maybe and say, is there anything else that we could track this as? At the end of the day, what are we ultimately asking this liquor store to do? Yes, we're providing them information. We're giving them, the information needed to make the decision. But to me, ultimately, at the end of the day, we're asking them, yes, to enhance physical design. We just kind of talked about that. You could also probably claim that it is a policy change as well, if it's going to be that the store is going to require employees to scan IDs. You could claim that they're going to change a policy at their store. The actual installation of the ID scanner, you nailed it right on the head, Caitlin. It would be physical design. We just kind of talked about that, right? We said, actually having that scanner there is changing the layout of the store counter, and the ability for them to have that there at their fingertips, right? The physical design piece. So yes. And this is definitely, I'm glad I started out with this example because I think this is a great example of how sometimes it feels like it's more than one strategy, right? There's just so many different strategies to choose from. It's like, how do we narrow down what is my strategy for this specific output, right? So I think it helps a lot to think through the different pieces because there might be different strategies at different times. You know, like, especially like Caitlin says, you know, the implementation or the installation of the ID scanner, complete physical design. But if this is about the store also modifying their store policy, we also have that policy piece. So there is going to be certain cases where we have, you know, two different things happening, which does result in two different strategies. Not very often does that happen, but sometimes you're going to come across cases like this where we have multiple things we're trying to do at the same time that technically utilize different strategies. Does that make sense to everyone? If anyone has any questions on that, feel free to pop in the chat, or if you're confused, let me know. We can kind of come back to that if we need to. And my biggest tip with, I will kind of add this in, with actions and changes is, like I've said, everything, anything we do is providing information, but a lot of times with your actions and changes, really think through, what is my intention here? Is my intention related to a different strategy? And if you think it is, go with that as your strategy, because at the end of the day, as your scorer, as your reviewer, we will let you know, hey, this is wrong, or hey, you maybe explain this a little bit more on why you came up with this strategy. And that's why it's really helpful sometimes just adding that extra piece of information to your description. One word can change a whole description from one strategy to another. So, you know, if there's ever any questions you have or you're not sure, let us know. We can always talk through it. Sometimes just having a sounding board there, someone to pose those questions to you, well, is there anything else happening here? Or is that your actual intention? Can help you think through, oh, well, maybe it's not, maybe it's this. So definitely reach out if you ever have any questions. So our next example is a community change. And this one is going to be, as a result of our coalition's great advocacy that we were doing, the local school district decided to install a permanent no tobacco use signs on their property. So they used to not have anything. Now that, you know, the whole vaping tobacco issue is huge, they decided to install new signs on school property that say no tobacco use. Great. A lot of schools have been moving to do this. We want to make sure we kind of talked about this one today. This was just the logic model that came up for my coalition. Obviously, depending on what your coalition is working on, it might be a little different. So physical design is definitely a strategy we're using here. So kind of the first two, we're starting off with a heavy physical design presence, which is totally okay. But yes, since we are installing permanent no tobacco use signs on our school property, we're clearly changing the layout, the physical design of that certain area. Great. Ginger got it too. Awesome. So let's go ahead and move into our next example. Let's maybe change it up, get a little bit of a different strategy here. This one is going to be media. So our sample description is that we distributed 30 mental health information packets to the school administration and teachers. Pretty easy, self-explanatory one here. Anyone wants to take a crack at the strategy here? I think everyone knows what it is. So it is providing information. Yep, if some of you were debating anything else, I could see someone trying to debate enhancing skills on this. But at the end of the day, I think it comes down to my description. My description says it was plain just packets with information, right? We're not there to train anyone. We're not there to enhance anyone's skills. We really just want to give them this information to have. So in my case, the strategy would be providing information. If it had, you know, maybe the health packet had a guide in it that says the 4 steps on how to talk to someone about their mental health. That you might be able to get away with using more of an enhancing skills strategy. Again, this is where it goes really back to your description and how you are labeling it, how are you describing it in your description. because at the end of the day, that's going to link you to your strategy. So now let's get into a service provided maybe. We have a sample description of that we presented to the Pleasantville School District Board about the need to expand and modify their policies to include e-cigarette, nicotine devices. We talked about the latest data on this information, youth use, behaviors on school grounds. We're really just there to kind of advocate towards this expansion of the policy and modifying the policy, right? I think this one is pretty self-explanatory too. I tried to make, I don't want to say I made them easy on you guys, but I think the description lays it out quite well on what strategy we're using here. And that's going to be modifying, changing policies, right? I think this goes hand in hand with Ward's question when he got a little confused on that last one. You know, what if if we're just there to provide information, how do we say this is modifying, changing policies? This is where I was going with this, Ward, that at the end of the day, yes, we're giving them this information, we're sharing the data with them. At the end of the day, we're ultimately asking them to modify this policy. We're ultimately trying to change the policy to include electronic nicotine devices as part of the tobacco piece of it. So definitely think through those, what are my intention? What am I trying to do here piece? Because that's going to lead you to that strategy of modifying, changing policies, especially in this case. Our next description we have is that we held a mental health first aid training class for all teachers and staff at Riverside High School. So we went ahead and we went to the school, we held a training for 3 hours. We ended up having 20 staff show up, which is great. So we want to go ahead and add this in as our service that we provided, right? Awesome. I love where Caitlin's head is going. Our strategy here is definitely going to be the building skills, enhancing skills strategy. Pretty clear here that we're there to provide a class, train them on this mental health first aid training, and really get them these skills and knowledge that they need to conduct a mental health first aid with a student, with another teacher or staff or whoever it may be. All right, we have, I think this is our last example for today, and then we'll kind of open the floor if anyone else has any questions or examples they want to talk about. But our last one here is going to be this. We provided a local parent with a prescription drug lockbox for her home for the first time. So she has never had a lockbox in her home before. She came and requested one. We provided her with one. You can technically consider this a community change if it is the first time that this household is receiving their in-home lockbox. It's more of that small P approach that we kind of have. You know, it's an in-home, it's a personal decision, it's the household decision that they decide to change this within their home and how they organize and lock up their meds, right? So we went ahead and added in our logic model for that one. So prescription drugs, access, you know, youth are getting medications from the home. And for our strategy for this one, I think everyone probably knows which one it is, but if anyone wants to put it in the chat before I show you guys, that's okay. If you're thinking about it, you're kind of on the fence about it too, I would go with enhancing access and reducing barriers here. Because at the end of the day, providing that parent with that lockbox for her home is going to help her lock up her meds, to reduce the access that their child or children have to that medication. My last area I wanted to really dive into today was just tips. You know, everyone loves a good tip on how we can select the right strategies, right? Or tips to help us get better at this. So with that in mind, I came up with a little list, kind of asked some of my other staff members who score your data, review it, and we kind of came up with use your action plan as a guide. Use it, use it, use it, because it goes into that intervention mapping piece, and most of the time it breaks it up by strategy depending on what's in our action plan, what we need to be doing. So it can't hurt to pull it up from time to time and just review it. You know, maybe it's even something you guys do, start doing at a coalition meeting or start doing at a staff, you know, meeting or a board meeting, whatever it may be that you guys need to do. Start looking at that, because A, you should be using your action plan on a weekly, monthly, day-to-day basis anyway for your work. So get familiar with the work that you're doing and what strategy it's using. So at the end of the day, you go to reach, you know exactly what strategy it is, and there's no contemplation happening. There's no doubt in your mind that you know the strategy. Again, the question, what was the intention? What is our main goal, our main focus, our intention behind this output? What are we trying to do here? At the end of the day, you guys are all trying to reduce alcohol, drug, marijuana, substance use. But think through, what is the actual intent? Are we trying to change a policy here in terms of a strategy? Are we trying to just enhance skills? Are we trying to provide support? Are we just kind of intending to give this information to those who are in attendance? Really think through that, what is my intention piece. The community change output may be one strategy, while another entry for the same output may be a different strategy. We haven't talked about this too much, but it does come up. For example, if we worked with our local carryout to get them to pass a policy to require all their employees to attend a training, TIPS training, we'll say. The actual community change for that policy is modifying changing policy, right? Clear as day, it's policy change. They sign that policy for their employees to now have to attend this training. Now, when we record this as a service provided, we may hold the training that exact same day that they pass the policy. That strategy is different, right? That's enhancing or building skills. So really make sure that when we are entering, multiple outputs at the same time, we think through that strategy piece, because there might be two different aspects happening. A lot of times we come up with that with our media too. We might have a media entry and a community action happening at the same time. The media entry typically is going to be providing information strategy, where the community action piece, kind of like Ward was saying earlier, he gets kind of confused with, well, we're just there to give them information. The media piece, if you hand out, something there, yes, of course, providing information. But if you're there to talk about the school changing or modifying a policy, that community action is going to be modifying, changing policies. So always, always, always double check that, because that might be where you're getting caught up with the two strategy issue, is you're like, this feels like two strategies. It's probably because you have two different output types happening, which probably means you are using two different strategies. So my last two tips are, be careful with media. And I only like to give this as a little warning, because a lot of times people might get strategy happy and they're like, oh, we're building skills here, or we are enhancing access here. Probably about 80 to 90% of the time, your media is typically just providing information. Because at the end of the day, you cannot track if you actually enhanced someone's skills by giving them a how-to pamphlet, or sometimes you can, and that's totally okay, and that does come into play. Sometimes I will say we do have coalitions that have quite a few materials and media that they have that are enhancing skills, and that's okay, but always, always, always double check and just be careful with that media piece. And then our last tip is, most of the time, everything we do is providing information. I have said this so many times today, but that is totally true. However, it's always important to think past that at times and make sure we shouldn't be tracking it as another strategy, because it's really easy to fall into the providing information lull, where we just put everything under providing information because we know it's easy, we know it goes there, it makes sense. And it's really easy as your scorer to get trapped into that as well, because you might not be putting all your information in your description. So we can't know to tell you that it's something else if you don't add that to your description. So, really think through how that all aligns, and making sure that we're not just providing information because it's easy. We're thinking past it and saying, is this actually a different strategy for this? As always, make sure you are liked us on Facebook, join us on Facebook here at epiphanycommunityservices.com. We post all of our, data deadlines. We try to keep that up to date with information and notifications for you guys. So if anything you need, you can always check it on there. Our next webinar, wanted to make sure we brought this up for you guys to register, is going to be a Coalition Basics webinar. So the idea for this year is just kind of, we want to take it back to basics. It's always healthy to go back, refresh our memory, talk about our basics, and make sure we have a good foundation, right? So on March 31st, again at 1 p.m., we are going to be talking about what is data and why is it important. So kind of just a general overview of what is data. We know there is tons of different kinds of data, but really at the end of the day, we want to get into why is it important. As evaluators, we love data. It's important to our process, your guys' process. So we want to make sure that it's really clear what it is, why it's important, and really why we need it, right? So you can always register for any of our upcoming webinars on our monthly webinar tab on our website. Sorry, guys. And with that, thank you all for joining us today for our Reach Tips training. And as always, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to reach out. Our general information email is just info@epiphanycommunityservices.com. And as most of you know, if you need to email any of us, it's just going to be our name @ECS. So feel free to let me know if you guys have any questions, and enjoy the rest of your day.